Story 1. My brother's wife has been making up horrible lies about our family for years. This Christmas, I finally had enough and showed everyone her Facebook posts. I, 25 male, never imagined my family would end up like this, divided by a string of lies, miscommunication, and one person's relentless need to twist the truth. My twin brother and I used to be inseparable. Growing up, we shared everything, our toys, our friends, even our worst teenage secrets. But that all started to change the day he met his now wife. Let's call her, as for simplicity's sake. She came into our lives when we were 15, and at first, everyone loved her. She was charming, polite, and seemed to make my brother genuinely happy. My mom practically treated her like the daughter she'd always wanted. You'd think that would mean we were the perfect happy family, right? Not quite. From the start, S had a strange way of interpreting things. She'd make offhand comments about how we treated her terribly, even though none of us could ever figure out what she meant. My best friend, who was in the same after-school club as S, told me that S would complain about my family constantly. But when pressed for details, she dodged the question. At first, we chalked it up to teenage drama. We were all moody, insecure, and figuring life out. Why make a big deal of it? But as the years went by, it became harder to ignore. S and my brother managed a long-distance relationship while they were at universities 150 miles apart. By the time they moved in together in year 6, her behavior had gone from mildly frustrating to downright isolating. Every time my brother came to a family dinner, she'd call them halfway through with some urgent reason to leave. The sink is leaking, the car won't start, there's a spider in the bathroom, you name it. She always found a way to pull him back home. My parents, bless their hearts, were patient to a fault. They tried everything to make her feel welcome, inviting her to family outings, hosting her on holidays, even offering her girls' days with my mom. S turned down every single invitation. She never said why, just made excuses or ignored them altogether. My mom once told me, "I think she just doesn't like us, but we'll kill her with kindness anyway." I admired their approach, even if it felt like a losing battle. Then came the wedding. S and my brother got married last year after nearly a decade together. None of us were involved in the planning, not a single dance, speech, or toast. S insisted that nothing family-related was happening, so we didn't push it. But imagine our shock when we sat there during the reception, watching her family take part in all the traditional moments we were told wouldn't exist. We sat in awkward silence while they laughed, danced, and gave speeches. It was like being spectators at a stranger's event. That night, mutual friends reached out to me, asking what the drama was between S and our family. Drama? What drama? As far as we knew, everything had gone smoothly. Turns out, S had been spreading lies to anyone who would listen, painting S as controlling, manipulative, and downright abusive. My personal favorite, a story about how my dad stormed into their house demanding money for his gambling debts, while my mom threw salt on their non-existent grass to kill it. At the time, my parents were literally out of the country. The absurdity would have been funny if it weren't so damaging. When I confronted my parents about it, they sighed and said, "She doesn't like us. But what can we do? We just have to rise above it." I respected their patience, but deep down, I knew this was far from over. Looking back, I wonder if the signs were there from the beginning. S always seemed to have a knack for making herself the victim, even when there wasn't any conflict to speak of. My brother? He was blind to it, or maybe just chose not to see. When you're in love, it's easy to overlook the red flags. For the first couple of years, S was practically part of our family. My mom adored her, often saying she was the daughter she never had. Honestly, that stung more than I'd care to admit. While S was out shopping with my mom or getting invited to special dinners, I felt like the odd one out. Not that I hated her, it just felt like she was better at fitting into the mold my parents seemed to value. But cracks began to form. S would make subtle comments here and there, like, "I don't think your mom really likes me," or "Your dad seems to be judging me all the time." My brother would brush it off, saying she was just nervous. Nervous about what? My parents bent over backward to welcome her, going out of their way to include her in everything, even when it meant leaving me feeling sidelined. If anything, she was given more attention than anyone else. As time went on, the nervousness turned into outright avoidance. S stopped coming to family dinners, citing flimsy excuses that made less sense with each passing year. "I'm too tired. I have work to catch up on," or "It's just not a good day." On the rare occasions she did show up, she'd sit in stony silence, answering questions with one-word responses or passive-aggressive remarks. My brother, ever the peacemaker, would step in to smooth things over, but even he couldn't ignore how awkward it had become. Then came the big shift, S and my brother moving in together. At first, we thought this might improve things, maybe having their own space would ease the tension. Instead, it only seemed to give S more leverage. My brother's visits home became less frequent, and when he did come, it was always with the same routine, S calling halfway through, demanding he come back for some fabricated emergency. I'll never forget one particular dinner. My mom had gone all out, cooking his favorite meal and setting up the table just like when we were kids. My brother seemed genuinely happy to be there, laughing and reminiscing like old times. Then, right on cue, S called. I could see the frustration in his eyes as he answered the phone, pacing back and forth while she rattled off reasons why he needed to leave immediately. By the end of the call, he was making excuses for her again. "She's just stressed," he said, grabbing his coat. "I'll see you all soon." Spoiler alert, we didn't. By the time they got engaged, my parents had resigned themselves to the reality that S would never truly be part of the family. Still, they stayed optimistic, hoping marriage might bridge the gap. Instead, it only made things worse. S controlled every aspect of the wedding, ensuring our side of the family played no significant role. We weren't upset about being excluded. It was her wedding, after all. But the blatant favoritism toward her family stung. Watching her parents and siblings give speeches, dance with the bride and groom, and bask in the spotlight while we sat there like background characters, it was a slap in the face. The wedding reception was when I first realized just how far S was willing to go to paint us as villains. Friends sent me screenshots of her messages detailing outrageous accusations against my parents. She told them we were demanding money, sabotaging their relationship, and even harassing her. None of it was true, of course, but the lies were convincing enough to make people question us. At the time, I didn't confront her. My parents' strategy of killing her with kindness had rubbed off on me, and I decided to let it slide for the moment. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before things reached a breaking point, and that point came sooner than I expected. The breaking point came last Christmas. My brother and S had been married for a year by then, and our family was still tiptoeing around the tension. We'd all agreed to keep things civil, even if S made it nearly impossible. That year, it was our family's turn to host Christmas Day. We rotate each year, one with us, one with her family. Simple, right? Not this time. I arrived bright and early with my partner, excited to spend the day with everyone. My parents had been up since dawn prepping food, decorating, and generally making the house feel festive. My brother was already there, but something felt off. When I asked where S was, he mumbled something about a family emergency and said she'd join us later. I didn't think much of it at first. Emergencies happen. But then his phone started ringing, and ringing, and ringing. At first, he answered her calls, stepping outside to talk. Each time, he returned looking more frustrated. After the fourth or fifth call, he stopped answering altogether, muttering something about her phone acting up and repeatedly redialing him. It was a flimsy excuse, but no one pressed him. We all just focused on getting the meal ready and trying to enjoy the day. Then came the social media post. My partner and I were sitting on the couch, scrolling through our phones and comparing cheesy Christmas posts from friends. That's when my partner spotted something in a Facebook group, something that made my stomach drop. S had posted in a private group for women dealing with difficult in-laws. The post read, "DH is forcing me to go to his horrid family's Christmas dinner. They make me do all the cooking on my own but tell me it's horrible. His sister even assaulted me last time I went to their house, and she's just been kicked out of rehab, so she's back there again. I'm scared every day that DH is going to believe their lies about me and leave me. I'd rather kill myself than do this. Story 2. My brother's wife has been making up horrible lies about our family for years. This Christmas I finally had enough and showed everyone her Facebook posts. I, 25, male, never imagined my family would end up like this, divided by a string of lies, miscommunication, and one person's relentless need to twist the truth. My twin brother and I used to be inseparable. Growing up, we shared everything, our toys, our friends, even our worst teenage secrets. But that all started to change the day he met his now wife. Let's call her as for simplicity's sake. She came into our lives when we were 15, and at first, everyone loved her. She was charming, polite, and seemed to make my brother genuinely happy. My mom practically treated her like the daughter she'd always wanted. You'd think that would mean we were the perfect happy family, right? Not quite. From the start, S had a strange way of interpreting things. She'd make offhand comments about how we treated her terribly, even though none of us could ever figure out what she meant. My best friend, who was in the same after-school club as S, told me that S would complain about my family constantly. But when pressed for details, she dodged the question. At first, we chalked it up to teenage drama. We were all moody, insecure, and figuring life out. Why make a big deal of it? But as the years went by, it became harder to ignore. S and my brother managed a long-distance relationship while they were at universities 150 miles apart. By the time they moved in together in year 6, her behavior had gone from mildly frustrating to downright isolating. Every time my brother came to a family dinner, she'd call them halfway through with some urgent reason to leave. The sink is leaking, the car won't start, there's a spider in the bathroom, you name it. She always found a way to pull him back home. My parents, bless their hearts, were patient to a fault. They tried everything to make her feel welcome, inviting her to family outings, hosting her on holidays, even offering her girls' days with my mom. S turned down every single invitation. She never said why, just made excuses or ignored them altogether. My mom once told me, "I think she just doesn't like us, but we'll kill her with kindness anyway." I admired their approach, even if it felt like a losing battle. Then came the wedding. S and my brother got married last year after nearly a decade together. None of us were involved in the planning, not a single dance, speech, or toast. S insisted that nothing family-related was happening, so we didn't push it. But imagine our shock when we sat there during the reception, watching her family take part in all the traditional moments we were told wouldn't exist. We sat in awkward silence while they laughed, danced, and gave speeches. It was like being spectators at a stranger's event. That night, mutual friends reached out to me, asking what the drama was between S and our family. Drama? What drama? As far as we knew, everything had gone smoothly. Turns out, S had been spreading lies to anyone who would listen, painting S as controlling, manipulative, and downright abusive. My personal favorite, a story about how my dad stormed into their house demanding money for his gambling debts while my mom threw salt on their non-existent grass to kill it. At the time, my parents were literally out of the country. The absurdity would have been funny if it weren't so damaging. When I confronted my parents about it, they sighed and said, "She doesn't like us, but what can we do? We just have to rise above it." I respected their patience, but deep down, I knew this was far from over. Looking back, I wonder if the signs were there from the beginning. S always seemed to have a knack for making herself the victim, even when there wasn't any conflict to speak of. My brother? He was blind to it, or maybe just chose not to see. When you're in love, it's easy to overlook the red flags. For the first couple of years, S was practically part of our family. My mom adored her, often saying she was the daughter she never had. Honestly, that stung more than I'd care to admit. While S was out shopping with my mom or getting invited to special dinners, I felt like the odd one out. Not that I hated her, it just felt like she was better at fitting into the mold my parents seemed to value. But cracks began to form. S would make subtle comments here and there like, "I don't think your mom really likes me," or "Your dad seems to be judging me all the time." My brother would brush it off, saying she was just nervous. Nervous about what? My parents bent over backward to welcome her, going out of their way to include her in everything, even when it meant leaving me feeling sidelined. If anything, She was given more attention than anyone else. As time went on, the nervousness turned into outright avoidance. S stopped coming to family dinners, citing flimsy excuses that made less sense with each passing year. "I'm too tired. I have work to catch up on," or "it's just not a good day." On the rare occasions she did show up, she'd sit in stony silence, answering questions with one-word responses or passive-aggressive remarks. My brother, ever the peacemaker, would step in to smooth things over, but even he couldn't ignore how awkward it had become. Then came the big shift, S and my brother moving in together. At first, we thought this might improve things. Maybe having their own space would ease the tension. Instead, it only seemed to give S more leverage. My brother's visits home became less frequent, and when he did come, it was always with the same routine, S calling halfway through, demanding he come back for some fabricated emergency. I'll never forget one particular dinner. My mom had gone all out, cooking his favorite meal and setting up the table just like when we were kids. My brother seemed genuinely happy to be there, laughing and reminiscing like old times. Then, right on cue, S called. I could see the frustration in his eyes as he answered. The phone, pacing back and forth while she rattled off reasons why he needed to leave immediately. By the end of the call, he was making excuses for her again. "She's just stressed," he said, grabbing his coat. "I'll see you all soon." Spoiler alert, we didn't. By the time they got engaged, my parents had resigned themselves to the reality that S would never truly be part of the family. Still, they stayed optimistic, hoping marriage might bridge the gap. Instead, it only made things worse. S controlled every aspect of the wedding, ensuring our side of the family played no significant role. We weren't upset about being excluded, it was her wedding after all, but the blatant favoritism toward her family stung. Watching her parents and siblings give speeches, dance with the bride and groom, and bask in the spotlight while we sat there like background characters, it was a slap in the face. The wedding reception was when I first realized just how far S was willing to go to paint us as villains. Friends sent me screenshots of her messages detailing outrageous accusations against my parents. She told them we were demanding money, sabotaging their relationship, and even harassing her. None of it was true, of course, but the lies were convincing enough to make people question us. At the time, I didn't confront her. My parents' strategy of killing her with kindness had rubbed off on me, and I decided to let it slide for the moment. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before things reached a breaking point. And that point came sooner than I expected. The breaking point came last Christmas. My brother and S had been married for a year by then, and our family was still tiptoeing around the tension. We'd all agreed to keep things civil, even if S made it nearly impossible. That year, it was our family's turn to host Christmas Day. We rotate each year, one with us, one with her family. Simple, right? Not this time. I arrived bright and early with my partner, excited to spend the day with everyone. My parents had been up since dawn prepping food, decorating, and generally making the house feel festive. My brother was already there, but something felt off. When I asked where S was, he mumbled something about a family emergency and said she'd join us later. I didn't think much of it at first. Emergencies happen. But then his phone started ringing. And ringing. And ringing. At first, he answered her calls, stepping outside to talk. Each time, he returned, looking more frustrated. After the fourth or fifth call, he stopped answering altogether, muttering something about her phone acting up and repeatedly redialing him. It was a flimsy excuse, but no one pressed him. We all just focused on getting the meal ready and trying to enjoy the day. Then came the social media post. My partner and I were sitting on the couch, scrolling through our phones and comparing cheesy Christmas posts from friends. That's when my partner spotted something in a Facebook group, something that made my stomach drop. S had posted in a private group for women dealing with difficult in-laws. The post read, "DH is forcing me to go to his horrid family's Christmas dinner. They make me do all the cooking on my own but tell me it's horrible. His sister even assaulted me last time I went to their house, and she's just been kicked out of rehab, so she's back there again. I'm scared every day that DH is going to believe their lies about me and leave me. I'd rather kill myself than do this." Story 3. My brother partied away his teens while I worked 2 jobs to save $15,000 for college. Then he convinced our mom to let him borrow it. Flunked out after 1 semester and laughed when I asked for it back. When I told him he'd stolen my future, he rolled his eyes and said, "You're just mad I figured out how to win without working." I didn't say a word. That was 6 years ago. This morning, he was dragged out of court screaming, while the judge gave him 25 more years. Growing up, my parents always made it clear that college was our responsibility. They weren't wealthy, but they encouraged both my brother Jake and me to save every penny we could for our future education. While Jake spent his teenage years partying and buying expensive sneakers, I worked 2 part-time jobs throughout high school. One at a local grocery store and another tutoring younger kids in math. By the time I graduated, I had managed to save $15,000 in a dedicated college savings account. It wasn't enough to cover everything, but combined with scholarships and student loans, it would make my dream of studying engineering at State University possible. Jake, on the other hand, had maybe $2,000 saved and no real plan for his future. The summer before I was supposed to start college, Jake suddenly announced he was also going to attend State University. My parents were thrilled that both their sons would be getting an education, but I was confused. When I asked him how he was planning to pay for it, he just smirked and said he had it figured out. 2 weeks before freshman orientation, I went to check my college savings account balance to make final tuition payments. The account was completely empty. Every single dollar I had worked for over 3 years was gone. When I called the bank in a panic, they explained that since the account had both my name and my mother's name on it from when I was a minor, she had the authority to make withdrawals. I confronted my mother immediately through tears. She admitted that Jake had convinced her to let him borrow my money, promising he would pay it back after his first semester when his financial aid kicked in. She said Jake told her I could just take a gap year and reapply for more financial aid later. My own mother had chosen my lazy, manipulative brother over my carefully planned future. Jake acted like it was no big deal when I confronted him. He said I was being dramatic and that family should help each other out. He promised to pay me back, but I knew better. This was the same brother who still owed me $50 from when we were 12 years old. I had to defer my admission and watch as Jake moved into the dorms with my money. He bought a meal plan, new clothes, a gaming setup for his room, and even joined a fraternity. Meanwhile, I was stuck at home working double shifts at the grocery store, trying to save up enough to start school the following year. Jake's college experience was exactly what you'd expect. He partied constantly, barely attended classes, and flunked out after 2 semesters. Not only had he stolen my future, but he had completely wasted the money I had worked so hard for. When I asked him about paying me back, he said he was broke and would need time to find a job. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite being broke, Jake somehow managed to afford a brand new truck, designer clothes, and frequent trips to expensive restaurants. When I asked him about this obvious contradiction, he claimed he was doing freelance consulting work and getting paid in cash. I became suspicious and started paying closer attention to his lifestyle. Jake was living way beyond what any legitimate entry-level job could support, especially for someone with no degree and a terrible work ethic. He was always vague about his work, never had a consistent schedule, and seemed to have large amounts of cash, but no official pay stub or tax documents. After months of watching him flaunt wealth while refusing to pay back a cent of what he owed me, I decided to do some investigating. I discovered that Jake was running an under-the-car flipping business. He would buy damaged cars at auctions, do cheap cosmetic repairs to hide major mechanical issues, and sell them to unsuspecting buyers for huge profits. He was making thousands of dollars per month and reporting absolutely none of it to the IRS. I spent weeks documenting everything I could find. I took photos of the cars in various stages of repair in our garage, saved screenshots of his social media posts, bragging about his deals, and even recorded a conversation where he admitted to selling a car with a cracked engine block to a single mother, knowing it would break down within months. The final straw came when I graduated from community college 2 years later and was finally ready to transfer to State University. I asked Jake one last time about paying me back, and he laughed in my face. He said I needed to get over it and stop being such a baby about money. That's when I compiled everything I had gathered about his illegal business activities into a detailed report and sent it directly to the IRS. I included dates, amounts, photographs, and even provided them with the contact information of several people who had purchased cars from him. 3 months later, Jake received a letter from the IRS informing him that he was being audited for the past 3 years. The investigation revealed that he had failed to report over $80,000 in income from his car flipping operation. Between the back taxes, penalties, and interest, he owed the government more than $35,000. But that wasn't even the worst part. 2 of the people who had bought cars from him had filed complaints with the state attorney general's office for fraud, and the IRS audit had provided prosecutors with all the evidence they needed to build a case against him. My parents were furious with me when they found out what I had done. They said I was destroying my brother's life over money, and that family should stick together no matter what. But I reminded them that Jake had destroyed my educational plans without a second thought, and family loyalty should go both ways. Jake tried to get a lawyer, but legal fees would have cost him even more money he didn't have. He was forced to sell his truck, move back in with our parents, and take a legitimate job at a warehouse to set up a payment plan with the IRS. But the story doesn't end there. What my parents discovered next changed everything. And Jake's reaction was something none of us saw coming. The first thing they found was a stack of fake vehicle titles hidden in Jake's old bedroom closet. My mother had been cleaning out his room to make space for him to move back in when she discovered them tucked inside a shoebox. There were at least 20 counterfeit titles, all with different VIN numbers, but similar formatting errors that made it clear they were forgeries. My father called me immediately, his voice shaking. He wanted to know if I knew about this when I reported Jake to the IRS. I told him honestly that I had suspected something was off with his paperwork, but hadn't found concrete evidence of forgery. This was a whole new level of illegal activity that went beyond simple tax evasion. Jake's reaction when confronted was explosive. He stormed into the house, grabbed the box of fake titles from my mother's hands, and tried to run back to his car. My father, who had never laid a hand on either of us growing up, physically blocked the doorway. Jake shoved him hard enough that Dad stumbled backward into the wall. That's when something shifted in my parents' perspective. Seeing Jake willing to physically push past his own father to hide evidence finally opened their eyes to who he had become. My mother started crying. Not the manipulative tears Jake often used to get his way, but genuine heartbreak at realizing her son was a criminal. Jake tried damage control immediately. He claimed the titles were just practice documents from when he was learning about car sales. Nobody believed him. The quality of the forgeries, the specific VIN numbers that matched cars he had sold, and his violent reaction to their discovery made his guilt obvious. Over the next few days, more disturbing details emerged. My father found a second phone hidden in the garage, filled with text messages from angry customers whose cars had broken down. Some messages included threats of legal action, others just desperate pleas for help with repair costs. Jake had been ignoring them all, using the burner phone to keep his main number clean. I discovered something even worse when I helped my mother go through old bank statements. There were several large cash deposits made into her account over the past year, always just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. Jake had been using our mother's bank account to launder some of his profits, making her an unwitting accomplice to his crimes. When we confronted Jake about using Mom's account, he tried to flip the narrative. He accused me of being jealous of his success, claimed I was trying to destroy the family out of spite. He even suggested that I had planted the fake titles to make him look worse. His desperation was showing, and his usual manipulation tactics were failing. The situation escalated when one of Jake's victims showed up at our house. The single mother I had mentioned in my IRS report had tracked down our address after her car's engine seized completely. She brought her 2 young children with her, explaining tearfully that she had spent her entire savings on that car and now couldn't get to work. Jake hid in his room while my parents dealt with the distraught woman. My mother gave her $500 from her own savings to help with immediate expenses, and my father offered to look at the car for free. The woman's gratitude, mixed with her obvious desperation, hit my parents hard. This wasn't just about money anymore. Jake had been destroying people's lives. That night, my parents made a decision that shocked everyone. They gave Jake an ultimatum. Either he would turn himself into the authorities and take responsibility for his crimes, or they would do it for him. They set a deadline of 1 week for him to make arrangements. Jake's response was to disappear. He packed what he could fit in a friend's car and left in the middle of the night, leaving only a note that blamed me for ruining his life. My parents were devastated, but I think part of them was also relieved. The son they thought they knew had been gone for a long time. 2 days later, Jake made a critical mistake. He logged into his social media accounts from wherever he was hiding and posted a long rant about how his family had betrayed him. He included enough details about his car flipping operation that several of his victims saw the post and started sharing it. Within hours, it had been screenshotted and sent to local law enforcement. The post also caught the attention of a legitimate used car dealer who recognized some of the vehicles Jake had sold. This dealer had been wondering why several cars with suspicious histories had been showing up at his shop for major repairs. He contacted the police and offered to help identify more victims. Meanwhile, I was dealing with my own challenges. Some of Jake's friends blamed me for his downfall and started harassing me at work. They would come into the grocery store where I worked and knock products off shelves or stand outside during my shifts shouting insults. My manager had to ban several of them from the store. The harassment escalated when someone slashed my tires in the employee parking lot. Security footage showed one of Jake's fraternity brothers doing it, and he was arrested for vandalism. This led to an interesting discovery. The fraternity was investigating Jake for stealing from their treasury during his brief time as a member. As more people came forward with complaints about Jake, a pattern emerged. He had been scamming people long before the car flipping business. Former classmates revealed he had sold them fake concert tickets, borrowed textbooks he never returned, and even taken deposits for tutoring sessions he never showed up for. My parents aged years in those few weeks. They attended support groups for families of criminals, trying to understand where they had gone wrong. The truth was, they hadn't done anything wrong. Jake had simply chosen to take advantage of everyone who trusted him, starting with his own family. 3 weeks after Jake disappeared, he made another mistake. He tried to sell another car using one of his fake titles, but the buyer was suspicious and had a mechanic inspect it first. The mechanic recognized it as one of the vehicles that had been featured in the viral social media posts about Jake's scams. The buyer pretended to go along with the sale and arranged to meet Jake at a public location to complete the transaction. Instead of bringing cash, he brought the police. Jake was arrested on multiple charges, including fraud, forgery, and identity theft for using false names on the titles. When the police searched Jake's motel room, they found evidence of even more crimes. He had been creating fake employment verification documents to help people get car loans they couldn't afford, taking a cut of whatever they could borrow. He had also been selling the personal information of his customers to other scammers. My parents refused to bail him out. This was perhaps the hardest decision they ever made, but they recognized that protecting Jake from consequences had enabled him to hurt more people. They offered to pay for a lawyer if he would plead guilty and accept responsibility, but Jake refused. Instead, Jake tried to make a deal with prosecutors. He offered to testify against other people involved in similar scams if they would reduce his charges. The problem was, Jake had been working alone. His attempts to implicate innocent people, including some of his former friends who had refused to help him, only made things worse. During this time, I finally started my engineering program at State University. I had managed to save enough money, and ironically, the documentation I had provided to the IRS about Jake's theft of my college funds helped me qualify for additional financial aid. It felt surreal to be attending orientation while my brother sat in jail. The trial date was set for 6 months later. Jake's public defender advised him to take a plea deal, warning that the evidence against him was overwhelming, but Jake was convinced he could talk his way out of it, just like he always had. He insisted on going to trial. I was called as a witness, which meant facing Jake in court for the first time since he had disappeared. He looked different, thinner and older somehow. When I testified about finding my college savings account empty, he couldn't even look at me. His lawyer tried to argue that it was a family dispute, not theft, but the prosecutor pointed out that Jake had never made any attempt to repay the money, despite having significant income from his illegal activities. Other witnesses told their stories too. The single mother described how Jake had assured her the car was in perfect condition, even showing her a fake inspection report. A college student explained how Jake had sold him a car that turned out to be stolen, leading to his arrest during a traffic stop. An elderly man detailed how Jake had overcharged him by thousands of dollars, taking advantage of his limited knowledge about cars. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Jake was found guilty on all counts. The judge, noting Jake's complete lack of remorse and his attempts to implicate innocent people, sentenced him to 5 years in prison and ordered him to pay restitution to all his victims. The total amount was over $200,000. My parents were there for the sentencing. My mother cried quietly, while my father stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. When Jake was led away in handcuffs, he finally looked at me. For just a moment, I saw something like regret in his eyes, but then his expression hardened again. After the trial, something unexpected happened. Several of Jake's victims approached me to thank me for reporting him. They formed a support group, sharing resources and helping each other recover from their losses. The single mother even got her car properly repaired with help from my father and some honest mechanics who had heard about the case. I graduated from State University with my engineering degree 3 years later. My parents came to the ceremony, proud but still carrying the weight of Jake's choices. We had learned to be a family without him, though his absence was always felt. They had started volunteering with organizations that helped fraud victims, turning their pain into purpose. Jake was released after serving 4 years with good behavior. He reached out through a letter asking if we could meet. He claimed to have changed, to have found religion, and understood the harm he had caused. My parents wanted to believe him, but I was skeptical. Too many times. Jake had used false remorse as another manipulation tactic. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown. Jake showed up looking healthier than he had at trial, wearing simple clothes instead of his usual flashy style. He apologized seemingly sincerely for stealing my college money and for all the pain he had caused our family. Then he asked if I could help him find a job, claiming no one would hire him with his record. When I hesitated, his mask slipped just a little. He mentioned how successful I must be now with my engineering degree, how I could surely afford to help him get back on his feet. It was subtle, but I recognized the old Jake underneath the reformed exterior. I told him I would think about it and left. Later, I learned he had been asking other family members for money, too. Spinning slightly different stories to each person. Some things, it seemed, never changed, but at least now everyone knew better than to give Jake access to their bank accounts or trust him with their futures. The last I heard, Jake was working at a call center, living in a small apartment, and still owing most of his restitution. He occasionally sent messages to family members, usually around holidays, testing to see if anyone had softened toward him. Most went unanswered. As for me, I learned valuable lessons about family, trust, and standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. My relationship with my parents grew stronger once they stopped enabling Jake's behavior. We had all paid a price for his choices, but in the end, justice was served. The money he stole from me was never returned, but I built my future anyway. Every success I achieved felt like a small victory over the brother who tried to steal my dreams. And while I'll never forget what Jake did, I refused to let his betrayal define my life. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. The coffee shop meeting had been 3 months ago, and I'd hoped Jake would finally leave us alone, but I should have known better. My brother had never been one to accept defeat gracefully. The first sign of trouble came through my coworker Nathan at the engineering firm where I worked. He approached me during lunch one day looking uncomfortable. "Hey, your brother Jake called the office yesterday," he said, "asked a bunch of questions about you, said he was updating family records or something." My stomach dropped. Jake had no legitimate reason to contact my workplace. When I pressed Nathan for details, he admitted Jake had been fishing for information about my salary, my position, even my work schedule. Nathan had sensed something was off and hadn't shared anything. But the fact that Jake was sniffing around my professional life set off every alarm bell. That evening, I called my parents to warn them. Mom answered, sounding tired. "Oh, honey, Jake's been calling here too. Says he needs our help with job applications. Wants us to be references. Please tell me you didn't agree to that." I said, "There was a pause. Your father already did." Jake said no one else would vouch for him, and well, we're his parents. I wanted to scream. Even after everything, they still couldn't completely cut him off, but arguing wouldn't help. Instead, I focused on damage control. Just be careful what you tell any potential employers. Stick to basic facts only. 2 weeks later, I discovered Jake's real game. My credit monitoring app sent an alert about a new inquiry on my credit report. Someone had applied for a personal loan in my name. The application was denied due to insufficient credit history matching the request, but the attempt itself was troubling. I immediately placed a fraud alert on all my credit files and started digging. The loan application had used my social security number, my current address, but listed a different phone number. When I searched that number online, it traced back to a prepaid cell phone purchase just days before the loan application. Jake was trying to steal my identity. I gathered all the documentation and went to my parents' house. They needed to know what their son was attempting now. Dad was working in the garage when I arrived, and I could see the weariness in his eyes before I even spoke. "Jake tried to take out a loan in my name," I said, showing him the papers. Dad's shoulders sagged. "Are you sure it was him? Who else would it be? He knows all my information. And this happened right after he was asking Nathan about my job details." Mom joined us and I explained everything. This time, there were no tears, no excuses, just a heavy silence that spoke volumes about their exhaustion with Jake's behavior. "We'll change our locks," Dad said finally. "He still has a key from when he lived here." It was a small step, but at least they were taking it seriously. I helped them that afternoon, installing new deadbolts and making sure all the windows were secure. As we worked, Mom mentioned something that made my blood run cold. "Jake asked to borrow my phone last week when he stopped by, said his was dead and he needed to make an important call. Mom, he could have accessed your contacts, your saved passwords, anything," I said. We spent the next hour changing every password she had saved on her phone, updating security questions, and enabling two-factor authentication wherever possible. It felt like preparing for a siege, but with Jake, that's essentially what it was. The next escalation came through social media. I started receiving friend requests from people I didn't recognize, all with generic profiles and stock photo images. When I ignored them, the messages started. They all had a similar theme. Someone was spreading rumors about me being a snitch who destroyed their own brother's life. I knew it was Jake creating fake profiles to harass me. I blocked each one, but new ones kept appearing. Then, the reviews started showing up. Someone was leaving one-star reviews on my company's Google page, claiming I was unprofessional and had stolen money from clients. The reviews were obviously fake, but they still required time and effort to dispute. My boss, thankfully, was understanding when I explained the situation. "Family drama is the worst," she said. "Let's beef up security around here just in case." The company implemented a new policy requiring ID checks for all visitors and added my photo to the security desk with a note to alert management if Jake showed up. It was embarrassing, but necessary. 3 weeks into Jake's harassment campaign, things took a darker turn. I came home from work to find my apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was obviously missing, but things had been moved. My desk drawers were open, papers shuffled around. My laptop was still there, but it had been powered on. I called the police immediately. The officer who responded was sympathetic, but honest without proof it was your brother. "There's not much we can do. Nothing was taken. No damage done. Best we can do is file a report for your records." I had my locks changed that night and installed a security camera system the next day. The violation of my personal space left me feeling vulnerable in a way Jake's previous schemes hadn't. This was no longer just about money. It was about control and intimidation. My parents were horrified when I told them about the break-in. Mom actually suggested they should report Jake's whereabouts to his parole officer, but we discovered he'd been released from parole early for good behavior. He was completely free to harass us as long as he didn't technically break any laws. The security cameras proved their worth just a week later. I reviewed the footage after getting another credit alert, and saw Jake approaching my door around 2 p.m. while I was at work. He didn't try to enter, but he spent several minutes examining the new locks and camera placement. He was testing my defenses. I saved the footage and started building a harassment file. Every fake review, every suspicious credit inquiry, every documented incident went into a folder. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, but I knew documentation would be important. The situation reached a boiling point when Jake targeted my relationship with my girlfriend, Victoria. We've been dating for 6 months, and I'd been careful to keep her away from my family drama. But Jake had done his research. Victoria called me one evening confused and upset. "I just got the weirdest email," she said. "Someone claiming to be a concerned friend sent me a bunch of stuff about you being under investigation for fraud." My heart sank. Jake had found her work email and was trying to sabotage my relationship. The email included twisted versions of real events, making it sound like I was the one who'd been running scams and had framed my innocent brother. I spent 2 hours explaining the whole saga to Victoria, showing her my documentation, even pulling up the news articles about Jake's trial. She believed me, but the fact that she'd been dragged into this made me furious. "He's escalating because he's desperate," Victoria observed. "What does he actually want?" It was a good question. Jake's endgame wasn't clear. He couldn't seriously think harassment would make me give him money or help him get a job. This felt more like revenge, pure and simple. I decided to be proactive. I contacted a lawyer about getting a restraining order. The consultation was eye-opening. "Harassment cases between family members are tricky," the lawyer explained. "You need to show a clear pattern of behavior that makes you fear for your safety." I showed her my documentation folder. She reviewed it carefully, nodding at some parts, frowning at others. "This is good, but we need more direct evidence. The break-in is concerning, but without proof it was him, so I just have to wait until he does something worse." I asked. "Unfortunately, that's often how these cases go. Keep documenting everything. The moment he makes any kind of threat or you can prove he's behind the harassment, we'll have a stronger case." I left the lawyer's office frustrated but determined. If Jake wanted to play a long game, I could play one too. I hired a private investigator, someone recommended by the lawyer who specialized in family disputes. The PI, a former cop named Catherine, was straightforward. "I'll surveil him for a week, see what he's up to. Often, people like this are running multiple schemes. If we can catch him in something else, it might give you leverage." While Catherine worked, I focused on protecting myself and my family. I helped my parents upgrade their home security, taught Mom how to spot phishing emails, and made sure Dad understood not to give out any information about me to anyone, even if they claimed to be from my company. Catherine's report came back with interesting information. Jake wasn't just harassing me. He was running a new scam. He'd partnered with someone he met in prison to run a fake charity. They were collecting donations for reformed criminals seeking education, but the money went straight into their pockets. "It's small time compared to his previous operations," Catherine explained, "but it's definitely fraud. He's using fake testimonials, made-up success stories. I've got photos of him picking up cash from donation boxes they've placed in local businesses. This was exactly what I needed, not for a restraining order, but for something better." Jake was violating the terms of his restitution agreement by engaging in new fraudulent activities. One call to the prosecutor's office could send him back to prison, but I hesitated. Despite everything, some part of me still remembered the brother who taught me to ride a bike, who'd shared his Halloween candy with me when I was too sick to trick or treat. Was I ready to be responsible for sending him back to prison? The decision was taken out of my hands when Jake made his biggest mistake yet. He showed up at my workplace. I was in a meeting when security called my boss. She stepped out, then returned, looking grim. "Your brother's in the lobby. Security won't let him up, but he's making a scene." I could hear him from the elevator shouting about family loyalty and how I'd destroyed his life. Several clients were in the lobby watching this unfold. My professional reputation was now at stake. Security had already called the police by the time I reached the lobby. Jake's face was red, spittle flying as he ranted. "There he is," he shouted when he saw me. "My own brother. Too good to help family. You ruined my life." "You owe me." "You ruined your own life," I said, keeping my distance. "And you stole my college fund. If anyone owes anyone, it's you. That was years ago. I did my time, but you can't let it go, can you? You had to keep punishing me." The police arrived before Jake could escalate further. As they led him away, he was still shouting about how I'd betrayed him. Several co-workers had recorded the incident on their phones. My boss was understanding but firm. "We can't have this happening again." That night, I made the call to the prosecutor's office. I reported the fake charity, provided Catherine's evidence, and informed them about the harassment campaign. The prosecutor was very interested, especially since Jake still owed significant restitution to his victims. "We take violation of restitution agreements very seriously," she said. "We'll investigate immediately. I also filed for the restraining order, now having clear evidence of Jake approaching me at my workplace and causing a disturbance." The lawyer said the workplace incident significantly strengthened our case. My parents were devastated when I told them what I'd done. "More prison time?" Mom asked quietly. "He brought this on himself," I said. I tried to stay away from him. He's the one who couldn't leave me alone. Dad nodded slowly. "We know, it's just we keep hoping he'll change." "He's had every opportunity to change," I reminded them. "He chose harassment and more fraud instead." The investigation into the fake charity moved quickly. Jake and his partner had been sloppy, keeping poor records and leaving a clear paper trail. They were arrested within 2 weeks of my report. This time, Jake didn't get bail. His previous conviction and the new charges while still owing restitution made him a flight risk. He was held pending trial, and I finally felt like I could breathe again. The restraining order was granted, requiring Jake to stay at least 500 FT away from me, my home, and my workplace. It felt like a paper shield, but it was better than nothing. Victoria had stuck by me through all of this, even helping me organize my documentation for the lawyer. "Your brother's got serious issues," she said one evening. "But you know this isn't your fault, right?" I wanted to believe her, but guilt still gnawed at me. Had I started this cycle by reporting him to the IRS years ago? Or had Jake always been headed down this path? My answer came from an unexpected source. One of Jake's former friends, Jonathan, reached out to me. "I heard about what's been happening," he said when we met for coffee. "I wanted you to know Jake was always like this. Even in high school, he was running little scams. You didn't create this. You just finally held him accountable." Jonathan shared stories I'd never heard. Jake, selling fake IDs, running a term paper writing service that delivered plagiarized content, even stealing from the fast food job he'd had for exactly 1 week. "We all enabled him by looking the other way," Jonathan said. "You're the only one who ever stood up to him." It helped hearing that the guilt didn't disappear entirely, but it lessened. Jake's new trial was scheduled for 4 months out. In the meantime, life slowly returned to normal. The fake reviews stopped, the harassment ceased, and I could focus on my work and relationship without constantly looking over my shoulder. My parents started attending therapy to deal with their complicated feelings about Jake. The therapist helped them understand the difference between loving their son and enabling his behavior. It was painful growth, but necessary. 3 months into Jake's incarceration, awaiting trial, we received a letter from him. It was addressed to all of us, parents and me. I was hesitant to open it, but curiosity won. The letter was classic Jake. He started with apologies, transitioned to justifications, and ended with subtle requests for commissary money. He claimed he'd been forced into the fake charity by his partner, that the harassment had been misunderstood attempts to reconnect, and that if we would just drop the charges, he promised to leave us alone forever. "Same old Jake," Dad said, shaking his head. "Can't even write a letter without trying to manipulate us. We didn't respond." The prosecutor had advised against any contact, and honestly, there was nothing left to say. Jake had made his choices repeatedly, consistently choosing deception over honesty, crime over legitimate work. The fake charity trial was swift with Catherine's evidence and documentation from several businesses where they'd placed donation boxes. Conviction was almost certain. Jake's partner tried to pin everything on Jake while Jake tried to minimize his involvement. Neither strategy worked. Jake was convicted of fraud and violation of his restitution agreement. The judge, noting his pattern of behavior and failure to learn from previous incarceration, sentenced him to an additional 7 years. He would serve this consecutively, with any remaining obligations from his original sentence. When the sentence was read, Jake looked directly at me. There was no remorse in his eyes, only rage. As court officers led him away, he mouthed words I couldn't hear, but whose meaning was clear. This wasn't over for him, but it was over for me. I'd protected myself, my family, and my future from someone who'd shown repeatedly that he valued his schemes over our relationship. The brother I'd once known was gone, if he'd ever really existed at all. After the trial, my parents and I went to dinner at a quiet restaurant. We didn't talk about Jake at first, focusing instead on my work, their garden, anything but the elephant in the room. Finally, Mom broke the silence. "We've decided to write him out of the will," she said quietly. "Our lawyer is drawing up the papers. It was a huge step for them. An acknowledgement that Jake couldn't be trusted even after they were gone." I reached across the table and squeezed both their hands. "You're doing the right thing," I said. "We know," Dad replied. "Doesn't make it easier." As we left the restaurant, I felt a weight lifting. Jake was where he needed to be. My parents were finally setting boundaries, and I had my life back. The money he'd stolen was never recovered, but I'd gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I could stand up for myself, even against family. Victoria and I moved in together 6 months later at our housewarming party, surrounded by friends and family, minus one. I realized Jake had inadvertently given me a gift. His betrayal had taught me to value trustworthy people, to set boundaries, and to never let anyone, regardless of blood relation, destroy what I'd worked for. The last update I received about Jake came from the prosecutor's office. He'd been transferred to a facility 3 states away after getting into conflicts with other inmates. He was no longer our problem, just another number in the system he'd put himself into. My parents sold his remaining belongings, donating the proceeds to legitimate charities that helped crime victims. It felt like appropriate closure, turning his possessions into something positive for people he'd hurt. I still have the security cameras at my apartment, though I rarely check them now. The restraining order sits in my filing cabinet, hopefully never to be needed again. These reminders of a dark chapter serve as protection, but also as proof of resilience. Life moved forward. I got promoted at work. My relationship with Victoria grew stronger, and my parents found peace in their new boundaries. We learned to be a family of 3, occasionally acknowledging the absent fourth, but no longer defined by his chaos. The best revenge, truly, was living well, building the life I'd always planned, despite Jake's attempts to derail it. Every success felt earned twice over, once for the achievement itself, and once for overcoming the obstacles he'd placed in my path. The restraining order turned out to be just a piece of paper, exactly as I'd feared. 2 months after Jake's sentencing, I started noticing things again. Small things at first. My mailbox would be open when I came home. Packages would disappear from my doorstep, only to reappear days later, opened and resealed. The security cameras never caught anything definitive, just shadows at the edge of the frame. I knew it wasn't Jake himself. He was locked up 3 states away, but he'd always been good at making friends with the wrong people. My suspicions were confirmed when I ran into one of his old associates at a gas station. The guy smirked at me, made a comment about how Jake sends his regards, then drove off before I could respond. Victoria noticed my increasing paranoia. I'd started checking the locks multiple times before bed, reviewing security footage obsessively. She suggested we move to a new apartment, somewhere Jake's friends wouldn't know about. It felt like letting him win, but she was right. We found a place across town with better security, a doorman, and restricted access. The moving process revealed just how deep Jake's network ran. Our moving truck was vandalized the night before we were supposed to leave. All 4 tires slashed, obscene messages spray-painted on the sides. The moving company had to send a replacement, costing us an extra day and several hundred. Mom called while we were packing, her voice strained. Someone had been calling their house at all hours, hanging up when they answered. Dad had installed a call recording system, but the calls came from different numbers each time, all untraceable burners. They were considering changing their number, something they'd had for 30 years. Then came the letters, not to me, but to my employer, anonymous tips about my criminal history, claiming I'd been Jake's partner in his schemes. My boss called me into her office, showed me the letters. They were poorly written, full of easily disproven claims, but she had to investigate company policy. The investigation cleared me, of course, but it took 3 weeks of meetings with HR, providing documentation, and watching my coworkers whisper when I walked by. Even after I was cleared, the damage was done. I'd gone from rising star to the guy who brought drama to the office. Catherine, the private investigator, agreed to look into the harassment. She discovered that Jake had been making calls from prison using other inmates' phone privileges. He'd been coordinating with a network of people he'd met inside, promising them cuts of money he claimed I'd hidden from his illegal operations. "He's created an entire mythology around you," Catherine explained, showing me transcripts she'd obtained. In his version, you were the mastermind who set him up to take the fall. He's convinced these people you're sitting on hundreds of thousands in cash. The revelation was disturbing. Jake had turned me into a target for every small-time criminal he could reach. Catherine recommended I talk to the prison directly, file a complaint about his phone usage, but when I called, they claimed they'd monitor the situation. Nothing changed. Victoria and I settled into our new apartment, but the harassment followed. Our new address stayed secret for exactly 2 weeks before the hang-up calls started again. Then came the fake food deliveries, pizza, Chinese food, sometimes 5 or 6 orders a night, all cash on delivery. The restaurants eventually blacklisted our address, which meant we couldn't even order legitimately anymore. My parents were struggling too. Dad's small repair shop started getting bogus negative reviews online, all claiming he'd scammed them or done shoddy work. Each review mentioned that he was the father of those criminal brothers, making it clear this was connected to Jake. Dad spent hours trying to get the reviews removed, but new ones appeared faster than the platforms could investigate them. Mom's book club asked her to stop attending. Someone had sent letters to all the members warning them about her dangerous family connections. These were her friends of 20 years, but fear and gossip won out over friendship. She tried to explain, but the damage was done. I hired a lawyer to explore our options. He suggested a cease and desist letter to Jake, but we both knew it was pointless. What were we going to do? Sue someone already in prison with no assets? The lawyer did help us document everything properly, creating a paper trail in case we needed it later. The breaking point came when someone targeted Victoria's family. Her parents received a package containing photos of Victoria and me taken without our knowledge, along with a note suggesting their daughter was in danger because of her association with me. Victoria's father, a quiet accountant who'd never had so much as a parking ticket, wanted to hire bodyguards. I watched Victoria try to calm her parents down over video chat, saw the fear in their eyes, and felt something snap inside me. Jake had stolen my college fund, derailed my education, tried to destroy my career, and now he was terrorizing innocent people whose only crime was being related to someone I loved. That night, I made a decision. If Jake wanted to play dirty from prison, I could play smarter. I started with research, diving deep into prison communication systems, inmate networks, and the economics of harassment campaigns. What I found was enlightening. Jake was paying for all this harassment using commissary funds. Someone on the outside was putting money into his account, which he then used to trade for phone time and favors. The money had to be coming from somewhere, and I had a pretty good idea where. I contacted Catherine again, asked her to investigate who was funding Jake's prison account. It took her less than a week to find the answer. Jake had a storage unit I didn't know about, paid up for 5 years in advance. Inside, she found evidence of even more victims from his car flipping days, people who'd never come forward. She also found cash, about $30,000 hidden in various items. But here was the interesting part. Jake had been directing people to slowly empty the unit, selling items and depositing money into his commissary account. The person doing this was his former cellmate's girlfriend, who thought she was helping an innocent man wrongly imprisoned. I could have reported this to the authorities immediately, but I wanted to be strategic. First, I reached out to the victims Catherine had identified. Many were eager to file complaints once they learned Jake was in prison. Their statements would add to his restitution debt and potentially extend his sentence. Next, I worked with my lawyer to file a civil suit against Jake for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We couldn't get money he didn't have, but we could get a court order requiring the prison to restrict his communications. The key was proving the harassment was coming from him. Catherine helped us build an airtight case. She tracked down 3 of the people who'd been harassing us. Got one to admit on recording that Jake had promised him $5,000 to make his brother's life hell. We had phone records, financial transactions, even screenshots of messages Jake had sent through contraband cell phones. While we built our case, the harassment escalated. Someone tried to break into my parents' house while they were home. Dad confronted the intruder with a baseball bat, and the guy fled, but not before Dad recognized him as someone who'd visited Jake in prison. Mom was so shaken she could barely speak for days. Victoria's employer started receiving calls about her, similar to what had happened at my job, but her boss was less understanding than mine. She was put on administrative leave while they investigated despite having done nothing wrong. I watched her try to stay strong, but I could see the stress wearing on her. My own situation at work deteriorated further despite being cleared of any wrongdoing. I was passed over for a promotion I'd been working toward for 2 years. My boss apologetically explained that upper management felt I brought too much external drama to the team. Years of hard work undermined by Jake's vindictive campaign. Then Jake made a crucial mistake. He got cocky and sloppy. One of his harassment calls to my parents was made directly from his own prison phone account, not traded through another inmate. He forgot to block the number, and Dad's recording system captured everything, including Jake's voice clearly directing someone to visit me at work again. This was the evidence we needed. The recording proved Jake was orchestrating the harassment from prison. We filed our civil suit immediately along with criminal complaints for conspiracy to commit harassment and stalking by proxy. The prison finally took action, placing Jake in solitary confinement pending investigation. The lawsuit moved faster than I expected. Jake tried to represent himself from prison, filing rambling motions that made little legal sense. He claimed I'd fabricated evidence that I was the one harassing him, that the whole thing was a conspiracy to keep him from exposing my crimes. The judge wasn't impressed. During the proceedings, more evidence came to light. Jake had been running multiple harassment campaigns from prison, targeting not just me, but also the prosecutor from his trial, the judge who sentenced him, even some of the witnesses who'd testified against him. He'd created an entire network dedicated to revenge. The civil judgment came down hard. The court ordered Jake to cease all contact with me, my family, Victoria, and her family. Any violation would result in additional criminal charges. The prison was ordered to monitor all his communications and restrict his access to phones and commissary funds beyond basic necessities. But the real victory came from the criminal investigation. Jake was charged with 15 counts of conspiracy to commit harassment, stalking, and intimidation of witnesses. Each count carried up to 5 years. Even if he only got convicted on half of them, he'd be looking at decades more in prison. Jake's network crumbled quickly once he couldn't pay them. The harassment stopped almost overnight. No more calls, no more vandalism, no more threatening letters. It was like someone had flipped a switch. The silence was almost eerie after months of constant attacks. Victoria's job reinstated her with back pay and an apology. My situation at work improved slowly as the drama faded, and my colleagues remembered why they'd respected me in the first place. Mom's book club invited her back, shamefaced about their overreaction. Dad's fake reviews were removed after the platforms investigated and found they all came from the same IP addresses. The storage unit Jake had been using to fund his campaign was seized as evidence. The remaining money went toward his restitution debt, a small drop in the bucket of what he owed. The victims Catherine had found all filed their complaints, adding another $50,000 to his total debt. Jake's new trial was scheduled for 6 months out. This time, he couldn't afford even a public defender's full attention as he'd been classified as a vexatious litigant for his numerous frivolous filings. He was assigned a young lawyer fresh out of law school who advised him to plead guilty and hope for mercy. But Jake couldn't help himself. Even facing decades in prison, he tried one last manipulation. He sent a letter to our parents claiming he had terminal cancer and wanted to reconcile before he died. It might have worked 5 years ago, but we'd all learned better. Dad called the prison medical unit directly. Jake was perfectly healthy. The guilty verdict was inevitable. The evidence was overwhelming, and Jake's behavior during trial, interrupting witnesses, making threats from the defendant's table, only hurt his case. The judge sentenced him to an additional 25 years to be served consecutively with his existing sentence. When the sentence was read, Jake finally broke, not with remorse, but with rage. He screamed threats at me, at the judge, at everyone in the courtroom. He had to be physically dragged out, still shouting about how we'd all pay, how he'd never stop coming after us. But this time, I wasn't afraid. Jake had played every card he had, used every resource available to him, and lost. He'd be in his 70s before he had another chance at freedom, and that was assuming he didn't find new ways to extend his sentence from inside. The next few months were about rebuilding. Victoria and I stayed in our new apartment, slowly making it feel like home instead of a hiding place. My parents repaired the damage to their reputation in the community. I focused on my work, eventually earning that promotion I'd missed out on. We all attended therapy separately, and together. The therapist helped us process not just the recent harassment, but years of Jake's manipulations. It was painful work examining how we'd enabled him for so long, how we'd missed or ignored the warning signs. A year after Jake's final sentencing, I received a letter from one of his early victims. She thanked me for standing up to him, for ensuring he couldn't hurt anyone else. She'd used the restitution money to help pay for her daughter's education. It wasn't much, but it was something positive, born from Jake's destruction. My parents downsized their house, using the extra money to travel, something they'd always dreamed of, but never done. They sent postcards from places they'd only seen in magazines. Jake was never mentioned in their messages, but I knew they were finally living for themselves instead of managing his chaos. Victoria and I got engaged on a quiet Saturday morning. No grand gesture, just a simple question over coffee. We'd been through enough drama to last a lifetime. Our wedding was small, family, and close friends only. Jake's absence wasn't mentioned, but it was felt, a reminder of how much peace we'd gained. I sometimes wonder what Jake thinks about in his cell. Does he recognize that every consequence he faces stems from his own choices? Or does he still see himself as the victim, betrayed by a brother who refused to enable his crimes? I'll never know. And honestly, I don't care anymore. The money he stole from me was never recovered, but I built my life anyway. Every milestone, my degree, my career, my relationship was achieved despite his attempts to derail me. In trying to destroy my future, he'd only destroyed his own. My parents are in their 60s now, finally free to enjoy their retirement without Jake's chaos. They volunteer at a local literacy center, helping adults learn to read. It's their way of giving back, of creating something positive in the world. Victoria and I bought a house last year in a neighborhood where no one knows our history. We have normal problems now. Arguing about paint colors, dealing with a leaky roof, figuring out how to keep the garden alive, beautiful, ordinary problems that have nothing to do with prison calls or harassment campaigns. Success isn't about the money Jake stole or the years of education he delayed. It's about building a life surrounded by people who value honesty, who contribute rather than take, who build rather than destroy. It's about learning that family isn't just blood. It's the people who stand by you when standing by you is hard. Jake will be eligible for parole in 2048. He'll be 73 years old, having spent more of his life in prison than out of it. I don't know if I'll attend the hearing. Part of me hopes he finds redemption, learns to live honestly. But I won't hold my breath. And I won't wait around to find out. The best revenge truly is living well. Not despite someone, but because you deserve a good life, regardless of what others try to take from you. Jake taught me that, though I doubt he meant to. He showed me exactly who I didn't want to be, and in doing so, helped me become exactly who I am. My engineering firm is working on a project to make buildings more energy efficient. It's complex work that requires precision, honesty, and collaboration. Everything Jake never valued. Every successful project feels like proof that his way of living was the aberration, not the norm. Victoria is pregnant now. We're having a daughter. Sometimes I think about what we'll tell her about Uncle Jake, the family member she'll never meet. Maybe we'll simply say that some people make choices that take them out of our lives. And that's okay. We can love someone's memory while protecting ourselves from their reality. The nursery is painted soft yellow, filled with books and toys from friends and family. My parents are over the moon about becoming grandparents. They've already started a college fund for her in a trust, this time with multiple safeguards. We've all learned our lessons about financial security. Life moves forward. Work presentations, dinner with friends, weekend trips to the farmer's market. Normal, peaceful, drama-free life. The security cameras are still installed, but I rarely check them now. The restraining order sits in a filing cabinet, unnecessary but kept just in case. Sometimes I drive past the grocery store where I worked all those years ago, saving for a college dream that got delayed but never destroyed. The manager who helped me through Jake's harassment still works there. We wave when we see each other, a silent acknowledgement of shared history. My story isn't unique. Plenty of people have family members who choose crime over connection, who value schemes over relationships. But each story matters because each person matters. Each choice to stand up against manipulation makes the world a little bit safer, a little bit more just. The money Jake stole was $15,000, the cost of his choices, his freedom, his family, his future. I got the better end of that deal, even if it took years to see it. He's behind bars, and I'm living the life I always planned, just on a different timeline. Victoria just felt the baby kick for the first time. My parents are planning their next trip, this time to Alaska. My promotion came with a raise that finally let us pay off the last of my student loans. Life is good. Not perfect, but good. And that's enough. More than enough. Story 4. Dad married his new wife and started catering to my stepsister's every demand. He even asked me to give her my expensive skincare products, despite her stealing my things for months, so I refused and moved out to live with my mom instead. I'd always been close to my mom and dad. Growing up, both my parents were my rock. We shared everything. I knew they had my back and I had theirs. They had divorced, but things hadn't changed concerning their love and care for me. That was until my father married Claire. It wasn't that I didn't like Claire. She was sweet, caring, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. But things changed once she moved in with her daughter, Casey. I hadn't realized how much the dynamics of our family would shift once they became part of our lives. Claire was always trying to make sure Casey felt at home, but I didn't understand why it had to come at the cost of my relationship with my dad. It started off small. At first, I assumed it was just part of the transition. Casey, being in her late teens, was understandably going through some changes adjusting to life in a new house with a stepfather. I tried to be patient, giving her space. And yes, even I'm a teenager. But as time went on, I couldn't help but notice that my dad began shifting his attention more towards her than me. It was subtle at first. Little things, like him spending more time with Claire in the evenings, leaving me to eat dinner alone, or how he'd always ask me to tone it down if I was ever upset about anything. It was as though my dad was tiptoeing around me, always making sure Casey and Claire were comfortable, while I was left to manage on my own. When I voiced my concerns, my dad would brush them off, telling me I needed to be more understanding. He'd say that I knew how hard it was for Casey, and that she needed time to adjust, so we needed to make sure she felt comfortable. That was the problem. He never seemed to understand that it wasn't just about Casey feeling comfortable. It was about me feeling like I was being pushed aside. I wanted to scream, but instead, I tried to make it. I tried to keep it together. I had always been the one who took care of him, who was there for him in his moments of need. But now, it felt like none of that mattered. What about me? What about the years I spent being there for him when he needed me? Had I suddenly become invisible? Things got worse when Casey started coming up with excuses for everything. She would complain about the house, about my dad's cooking, and even about the way the furniture was arranged. My dad would jump up to change things, making sure she was comfortable, while I just sat there, feeling like a guest in my own home. It wasn't even about the small annoyances anymore. It was about the glaring fact that my dad was always looking the other way, just to make sure Casey didn't feel uncomfortable. I tried to keep the peace. I really did. I told myself it was just a phase, and that once Casey got used to being around us, things would return to normal. But it only got worse. One evening, after Casey complained about something ridiculous like how she didn't like the soap in the bathroom, my dad said it was time to have a family meeting. He wanted to discuss how we could all get along better. I was tired. Tired of pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. I agreed to the meeting, though I had a bad feeling about it. When we sat down, my dad started off by saying that Casey had been feeling a bit uncomfortable lately, and that he thought we all needed to make some changes to help her feel more welcome here. He pointed out that I'd been spending a lot of time with my friends, and he thought it was important for us to focus on family time. I blinked, trying to process what he had just said. Was he really suggesting that I spend less time with my friends, people who had always been there for me to make Casey feel better? I was furious, but I kept my voice steady. I told him that this was my home too, and I asked why everything had to change for Casey when she was the one who was new here. He immediately went on the defensive, saying that he was just trying to make sure Casey felt at home. He said, I knew this house inside and out, that she was just adjusting, and that I needed to be more patient with her. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told him I'd been patient, but that wasn't the issue. I said that it wasn't just about patience anymore, it was about how he'd been treating her like the most important person in the house, and I was just left to figure things out on my own. I asked him, what about me? What about the years I'd spent here, the times I needed him? He looked away, his eyes showing a flicker of guilt, but he quickly covered it up with a shrug. He said that he was just trying to make sure everyone was comfortable, and I needed to understand that things were different now. I was still his girl, but I had to understand that things couldn't stay the same. That was when I realized things had changed. My dad had changed. He was prioritizing Casey, and I was nothing more than an afterthought. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. My dad's words echoed in my mind. You've always been my girl, but things are different now. I hated it. I didn't want to accept it, but I couldn't deny the truth. He had changed. I felt more invisible than ever. Update 1. The morning after my conversation with my dad, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Every moment replayed in my head like an endless loop. The way he'd brushed aside my feelings, the way Casey had become more important than our family dynamic had all made me sick to my stomach. I needed to talk to someone. I needed someone who would understand, someone who wouldn't dismiss me as overreacting. And that someone was my mom. I dialed her number. The sound of the phone ringing felt deafening. When she picked up, I didn't hesitate. I needed to say everything before I lost my nerve. I started with a shaky voice, telling her what had happened with my dad. I explained how things had gotten worse with Casey living there and how my dad was more concerned with her comfort than mine. As I spoke, I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end. My mom had always been protective of me, but I never expected her to respond the way she did. My mom had remarried when I was 13, her new husband, Fred, and Frank was a good man. They met when I was in school, and he treated me like his own daughter. He never tried to replace my dad, but had always been a supportive figure in my life. My mom didn't make a big deal of it. She introduced him to me beforehand and let me get to know him before anything serious happened. When they married, it felt right natural. Frank never made me feel like I was competing for my mom's attention, and that's what made all the difference. My mom had always given me a choice. When she and Frank married, they made it clear that I could stay with them whenever I wanted. My dad had done the same, giving me the freedom to stay with either of them. It was a wonderful arrangement, and I cherished it. But now, with my dad prioritizing Casey over me, everything has shifted. I didn't want to be the one who felt neglected in my own family. I paused, unsure of how my mom would respond. She listened carefully, and then, in her calm and steady voice, she told me she was going to send my brother to pick me up. She said he would be there in a couple of hours, and I should pack my things because I was coming home. The relief I felt at that moment was overwhelming. Just knowing that someone, anyone, was on my side made all the difference. I wasn't alone in this. My mom had always been my biggest supporter, and now she was proving it once again. I had a half-brother, Luke, who was 5 years older than me. He and I got along well. He was never the overbearing type, and I had always appreciated the space he gave me. He had a different father, and I had my dad. But despite the differences, we were close. When my mom remarried, Luke didn't make it awkward. He welcomed me into their family with open arms, and Frank had done the same. There was never any tension between us, and I always admired Luke's maturity and the way he handled things. He was a solid guy, dependable, and honest. When my mom said she was sending Luke to pick me up, I felt a surge of comfort. He knew how to handle situations calmly, and I knew he'd have my back. I spent the next hour packing my things, the weight of the decision settling in my chest. I had been on my own for a long time, but now, leaving my dad's house felt like cutting a final tie. I didn't want it to come to this, but what other choice did I have? When I finished packing, I left a note on the kitchen counter for my dad. He wasn't home, probably still wrapped up in his new life with Claire and Casey. I didn't know when he would be back, but I wanted him to understand why I was leaving. I wasn't angry, I was heartbroken. I wasn't angry at Casey either. She was just trying to adjust to a new life, but my dad had let everything slip through his fingers. The note was simple. It read, "Dad, I need some space. I'm going to stay with Mom for a while. I can't be here anymore. I hope you understand." I wasn't expecting him to understand right away, but I needed him to know that I wasn't doing this out of spite. I was doing it because I needed to take care of myself. When Luke arrived to pick me up, I could feel the tension lifting. I grabbed my bag and followed him to the car, ready to leave the chaos behind. We didn't need to say much. I could tell by the look in his eyes that he understood. He'd always been the strong, silent type, and I appreciated that about him. As we drove to my mom's house, I thought back to when she remarried. It hadn't been easy for me at first. I was young, and it was strange to have a new man in the house, but my mom had made sure that Luke and I were involved every step of the way. She hadn't pushed Frank on me, and she hadn't tried to replace my dad. She gave me the space we needed, and in turn, Frank and Luke respected us. There was no tension, no drama. It wasn't like that with my dad. He hadn't asked me how I felt about Casey or her moving in. He didn't even consider how I might be affected by the sudden change, and that, more than anything, was what hurt the most. When we arrived at my mom's, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't just about getting away from the house. It was about feeling like I was with people who understood me, people who weren't going to prioritize someone else over me. As I unpacked my things and settled into the guest room, I thought about the note I'd left for my dad. I wondered how long it would take for him to realize I was serious. Would he come to his senses and fight for our relationship? Or was this really the end? Update 2. A few days passed since I left my dad's house, and though I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, something about the whole situation still gnawed at me. It wasn't just the betrayal I felt for my dad, it was the way Casey had overstepped, the way he had chosen her comfort over mine, and the way he seemed entirely unbothered by the fact that I was suddenly out of his life. I hadn't heard much from him, except for a text saying that he hoped I was settling in okay with my mom. That was it. No check-in, no genuine concern. He didn't even ask why I left. I knew he'd come to his own conclusions, probably thinking I was overreacting. Then, just a few days later, my phone rang. It was my dad's number, and for a moment, I hesitated before answering. The last time we'd spoken, I had been firm in my decision, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to deal with whatever he had to say, but I figured, what could it hurt? I answered the phone, keeping my tone even, trying not to let the frustration spill out. He wasted no time. He asked where I'd left my skincare products. At first, I was caught off guard. Of course, I'd taken them with me. Why would I leave them behind, especially when I knew Casey would try to get her hands on them? I told him that I had brought all my skincare products with me and that I didn't leave anything behind. He muttered something. He asked if I could drop off some of my skincare products because Casey wanted them. I felt the anger rise within me instantly. Casey had been using my things for so long without permission, and now my dad was asking me to hand them over like it was nothing. I didn't hold back. I told him that Casey could go buy her own skincare products. I wasn't going to drop anything off for her. She had no right to use my stuff, especially without asking. My dad tried to reason, claiming it was no big deal. He said that Casey was going through some things, and maybe it would help her feel more comfortable if she used my products. He said I didn't need all of them, and I should share. But I wasn't having it anymore. I asked him why he never did anything when Casey took my things before. Why hadn't he stepped in and put a stop to it? I told him that he let Casey walk all over me, and now he expected me to just hand over my expensive skincare products like they were nothing. I reminded him that I'd never given Casey permission to use them, and I wasn't interested in sharing. He stammered, trying to defend her. He said I was being unreasonable, but I wasn't going to let him gaslight me into thinking that what she'd done was okay. I told him exactly what I thought. He had chosen her comfort over mine, and he had let her take my things without any regard for me. He asked me, almost pleading, if I could just drop them off for Casey. I cut him off and told him that I wasn't going to continue letting Casey take what wasn't hers. I wasn't going to make excuses for her behavior anymore. And quite frankly, I was done. He tried to reason again, but this time, I didn't give him the chance. I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking with anger, but at the same time, I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't going to let him push me around anymore. I had tried to be the bigger person, to keep the peace, but Casey had crossed the line one too many times, and my dad had let it happen. Later that evening, I told my mom about the conversation. She listened carefully, and I could tell she understood. She didn't say much, but I didn't need her to. She had always supported me, and right now, that was all that mattered. I could feel the tension in my chest starting to ease as I realized that I had made the right decision. I wasn't going to let Casey or him dictate how I should feel or how I should allow myself to be treated. The time for keeping quiet was over. Update 3. My dad called me again one afternoon, around 2 weeks after the last call. I was sitting on the couch at my mom's place, catching up on some homework, when my phone lit up. His name flashed on the screen. I hesitated before answering. It had only been a couple of weeks, and honestly, I wasn't in the mood to go over the same old thing again. But I had to pick up. I answered the call, trying to keep my voice steady, but I could already feel my frustration creeping back in. He started off in his usual tone, apologetic but almost expectant, like he was hoping I would just come back. He asked me if I could come home. That was it. No real explanation, just an open-ended request. I didn't even hesitate before I refused outright. I told him I wasn't coming back. His tone shifted slightly, almost desperate. He told me that Casey had been acting out. Apparently, she had started shoplifting, specifically stealing skincare products, and she had been caught twice in the last 2 weeks. He said she was acting out and needed me back to help bring some order back into the house. I didn't hold back. I laughed, really laughed. I couldn't believe he was trying to drag me back into that mess just because Casey had been caught stealing. I told him he deserved it. He had coddled her so much, let her get away with everything. He pampered her, constantly excusing her bad behavior, and now he was dealing with the fallout. I told him I wanted nothing to do with Casey anymore. She was toxic. She had been a bad influence on me when I was still there, and I wasn't about to let him manipulate me back into that situation. He didn't like that at all. His voice rose, and I could hear the anger building. He told me I had no right to judge Casey like that. He claimed she was just going through a phase, and that she'd be fine if I came back and helped calm things down. But I wasn't buying it. I told him that Casey being Casey wasn't a phase. She was an entitled brat, and it was his fault for indulging all of her antics. He had made her this way by treating her like some kind of princess and excusing every bad thing she did. Now it was coming back to bite him, and he didn't know how to handle it. I heard him growl in frustration, probably thinking that I was being harsh, but I didn't care. I was done trying to reason with him. I told him, point blank, that he only wanted me back because I was the one who had to clean up after her mess, to put up with her stealing my things, and to keep the peace between him and his precious stepdaughter. His voice was trembling when he yelled at me. He told me I was being unreasonable, that I was making everything worse, but I just laughed. I told him that I wasn't the problem. He had been a pushover, letting Casey run all over him. He had turned her into a monster, and now he was paying the price. I reminded him that I hadn't stolen from anyone or caused trouble, but because of his indulgence, Casey had become a major problem. I told him that I was going to talk to my mom about this. I wasn't going to deal with his manipulations anymore. I was done being the scapegoat for Casey's behavior, and if he didn't get that, then he could keep going down this path alone. He didn't say anything for a few moments, and I could almost feel his helplessness on the other end of the phone. Finally, he muttered something about how I should at least try to be a little more understanding. But it was too late. I had made up my mind, and I wasn't going to allow him to drag me back into his mess. I told him that I had done enough, that I was going to focus on my life, and that I wasn't going to sit around cleaning up after him and his new family. I told him that if I wanted to stay with a sibling that bad, then I had Luke, who was perfectly well settled and well spoken, unlike his a-hole of a stepdaughter. Then I hung up. When I went to tell my mom about the conversation, she listened quietly, as usual. She didn't try to interrupt and didn't make any comments. But I knew she understood. She knew what kind of man my dad was, and she also knew that he had brought this situation upon himself. I could tell she was proud of me. She said she would have a conversation with him about this. Update 4. The next day, my mom, as calm as ever, sat me down for a conversation. I could see the look in her eyes. She wasn't upset, but she was clearly concerned. She had been quietly observing the way my father had been handling things, and I knew that my mom had a unique perspective. She had married a man who, while decent, was not always the most assertive, especially when it came to confronting difficult situations. She started by telling me that she had talked to my father, and she had to make sure he understood how serious this was. I listened carefully, knowing that when my mom decided to take action, it usually meant things had gone far beyond the point of being able to ignore them. My mom rarely intervened in things between my dad and me, and if she stepped in, it meant she saw something that could potentially get worse. She said that my dad had been very quiet during their conversation, clearly unsure of how to proceed. My mom, however, had made it clear that he had no one to blame but himself. He had allowed Casey's behavior to go unchecked for too long, and now it was spilling over into everyone's lives, including mine. She told him that he needed to step up and act like a father, not a doormat. He couldn't just keep giving in to Casey's demands. She said that she expected him to take responsibility for the situation and start being firm with Casey, no more excuses. My mom told him that he needed to man up. Casey was his responsibility now, and he had married Claire, so he needed to deal with the consequences of raising a child who had been indulged for too long. My dad, understanding that my mom was dead serious, knew better than to argue with her when she got to this point. She wasn't someone to lose her cool easily, and when she did, it was a sign that things had gone too far. My dad understood that, and he wasn't about to dismiss her concerns. Later that day, I received an unexpected call from Claire, my father's wife. I could tell she was trying to be calm, trying to find a way to fix things. She asked me if I would be willing to come back, to work things out. I wasn't in the mood for more fixing, but I still listened to her. She said she understood that things had gotten out of hand, but she was hoping that we could find a way to make things right. I didn't answer right away. I knew what she was trying to do. She was trying to fix things on her terms, trying to get me back into the fold so that everything could go back to the way it was. But it wasn't that simple anymore. The damage had been done, and there was no way I could go back to being the person I was before all this. I had seen too much, I had endured too much, and I wasn't going to let myself get pulled back into that toxic environment just because Claire felt guilty. I handed the phone to my mom, who had been sitting with me during the call. My mom was always calm and collected, even when handling situations like this. She took the phone from me, and I watched as her demeanor changed. There was no anger, no frustration, just a quiet resolve. She had been through this before. She started by saying hello to Claire in a tone that was calm but firm. My mom told Claire that she understood her concerns about me, but I was staying with her. I wasn't going back until she and my dad could address the situation properly. She told Claire that we had been through this conversation with my father before, and we wouldn't tolerate this kind of behavior at all. She said that I wasn't a scapegoat, and I wasn't going to be treated like one. My mom reminded Claire that I was a normal kid who deserved to hang out with friends and have fun, just like anyone else. I wasn't there to be a punching bag for their in the making family. My mom wasn't pulling any punches. She made it clear that unless things changed with Casey's behavior, I wouldn't be going back. She told Claire that she needed to take responsibility for the way things were and that the situation with Casey needed to be dealt with before I could even think about returning to that house. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I could hear Claire struggling to come up with a response. She wasn't used to hearing this from someone else, especially not from my mom, who was known for being calm but extremely firm when it mattered. Claire tried to respond, but my mom stopped her and said that she had said everything she needed to say. She wasn't going to entertain any more arguments. If Claire wanted me back in their house, it was on her to fix the situation with Casey and my father. My mom made it clear that I wasn't going back until both of them took responsibility and started rectifying things. My mom hung up after that. I could see the quiet satisfaction in her eyes. She wasn't angry. She wasn't upset. She was just resolute. She had done what needed to be done, and now it was in Claire's and my father's hands. Done, my mom said, a small smile forming on her lips. Now it's time for them to figure this out. You're not going back into that house until things change. I nodded in agreement. My mom had always had my back, but I hadn't realized just how much until this moment. She wasn't afraid to stand up for me, and she wasn't afraid to say what needed to be said. Update 5. A month later, my father called again. This time, his tone was different. There was a hint of genuine regret in his voice, and I could tell he was trying to make amends. He started by apologizing for being so thick-headed, admitting that he had been caught up in his own guilt and had failed to see how much damage he was doing. He said he would put in more effort, that he was willing to spend more time with me, just like we used to before all of this chaos. I was glad to hear it, but I wasn't about to jump back into things too quickly. I needed him to show me that he could really change, that he wasn't just saying the right things to get me to come back. I told him that I was willing to accept his apology, but I made it clear that if he started acting stupid again as he had before, then I would cut him off without a second thought. I wasn't going to let him drag me back into that toxic situation. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, but then he told me he understood. He promised that he would try his best to make it up to me, that he would be there for me, and that he wouldn't let Casey's behavior get in the way of our relationship anymore. I didn't feel fully reassured yet, but I appreciated the effort. I knew that my father wasn't perfect, but if he was willing to change, then maybe we could start rebuilding our relationship. I told him I'd be open to seeing how things went, but I wasn't going to let my guard down too soon. He agreed. I didn't want to lose him. He had been a good father to me before he remarried, and I couldn't just forget that because of the recent events. I was hopeful.